Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We're here live in London for the Digital Identity Summit 2019. I'm Mirela Ciobanu, Senior Editor with the Paypers, and together here with Stephen Topliss, Vice President of Fraud and Identity at LexisNexis, a risk company. We are going to talk more in details about the Digital Identity Summit, its main themes, and all the cool stuff happening in the fraud prevention space. So, hi, Stephen. Nice to meet you. I'll start with my first question. What is the Digital Identity Summit for those who do not know it yet?
Okay. So the Digital Identity Summit has really grown out of originally our user conference many years ago. So when ThreatMetrix first started, we started running a user conference 8-9 years ago. And as our digital network, our digital identity network grew, we started deciding that it was time to rebrand that user conference as the Digital Identity Summit. And so today, that Digital Identity Summit, while we remain the head sponsor of it, is really a conference, a one-day conference to network around everything digital identity. So we see our customers here, we see partners, prospects, people from anywhere in that domain of digital identity that have an interest in there are here to learn, to network, and share their ideas, basically.
Okay, and you mentioned today's conference. During your presentation, you talked about fraud becoming something really complex.
Yeah.
And you addressed cross-border fraud, omni-channel fraud, and cross-industry fraud.
Yeah.
Can you give us more, some insights into your presentation, some examples of fraud happening in emerging markets, and the latest things about social engineering and all these bot attacks?
Sure. That was a long question with lots
of
content. But yeah, I mean, the message really was that if we go back to the early years of ThreatMetrix and our early customers, fraud was relatively simple, and so you could stop it relatively easily. Even though it changed a lot, you could look at the fraud, identify it, analyze it, create new rules based on simple things like a browser string, the screen resolution of the device, simple things that as the fraud changed, you changed the rules and you could still win. The fraud today is much more complex. It's complex in a number of different ways. So some of the things you mentioned, so cross-border for one. So if I'm a fraudster and I can use a proxy server or a VPN service to hide my location, make you think that I'm attacking you from your own country and therefore go through any defenses you might have to prevent any transactions coming from overseas, then I can still get in and you don't know. So that's cross-border attacks are becoming more common. For the fraudster, of course, it's safe for them because it's much more difficult to identify, track them and prosecute them if they're abroad. From cross-channel, we see this whenever there are industries where there are potentially multiple ways that you can interact with your customers. So a classic example there would be in the banking space where I can do my online banking on the digital channel, but I could also call a call center or I could go into the branch. So I have numerous different ways that I can interact. Historically, fraud would occur on one of those channels. So I could go in the branch and try and defraud directly there or on the online channel. But as each of those channels has tighter defenses, the trick that the fraudsters do now is they use multiple channels. So I could, if I have access to your online banking, maybe through some stolen credentials, I might log in and learn everything about your account, how much money you have, what regular payments you do. But I won't try to commit the fraud there because maybe there's already something, an alert somewhere because it looks like it's maybe not you accessing the account, but it's not a high enough risk for the bank to get too worried. So now as the fraudster, I phone up the call center and say, yeah, I want to move some money, and maybe they go through a process of checks to check it's really me, and I have all the answers because I know everything about your account history from looking online. So it's a simple example, but using those cross channels can lead to that And then I think the last, what example did we have? What was the last one you mentioned?
The omni-channel fraud.
So that's really the omni-channel.
In a way,
so cross-industry was the other one. So
yeah.
cross-industry, we're also seeing where a fraudster, before they have a final target, which often is the bank because that's where the money is, they may initially carry out some fraud elsewhere to facilitate that. So I could go to a telecommunications company, apply for a new mobile phone, and use that mobile phone later while attacking the bank. And so we may actually see two separate fraudulent events there because the way they get that mobile phone is probably a fraudulent way. They don't actually want to pay for it. So the fraud in all these different ways is becoming much more complex and interlinked.
Okay, I think things are really scary by now when it comes to fraud happening. So now we need something like a remedy. And here comes the main theme of the Digital Identity Summit, which is empowering the network.
Yeah,
could you please tell us what is the ThreatMetric Digital Identity Network?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Digital Identity Network is basically a global anonymized network that is built out of every single event that our customers send to us for risk and fraud analysis. Okay. And that within that network of events then, we make links between all the individual data points to create these anonymized digital identities. So you and I both have a digital identity within that network, but we do that in a way that we don't need to know who we are.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you give us some numbers here? Because during the presentation, I mean, they are really impressive when it comes to number of transactions and...
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, so this quarter, we processed around 8.5 billion transactions. So just the sheer size of that, covering different industries, different use cases, different events, different types of customers globally in different regions. And all of that provides us with that networking capability. So your digital identity is most likely built up of different events that you've carried out at a number of different customers online or via your app. And that network then allows you then to be able to build links. So the example I gave earlier of a complex fraud occurring in multiple places, the chances are we see those different events and we can link them together. So if I've got a digital identity of a fraudster, I can see them doing these different things, and our customers can then have rules written in real time that are looking for that type of abnormal behavior.
Okay, and now looking into future, what's in store for the network for the rest of 2019 and beginning with next year?
Yeah, so we have to continue to innovate basically because as we were saying, fraud's continually changing. The network itself, it's there, it's going to stay there, and it's great. But there's a few things that we can look to do. So we want to continually bring more data into the network. So on the mobile side, as more and more people use their native apps, their mobile apps, we have an SDK that's embedded within those apps, and that can gather some data. We're continually looking to bring more data in. There's new techniques, there's new information that can be brought in. So we continue to enrich the types of data we bring in.
Regarding innovation, you mentioned, you said during the presentation, mentioned behavior biometrics and other,
So these are two key areas for us to focus on in the short term. So behavioral biometrics is really how do I interact with the keyboard? How do I move my mouse? How do I hold my phone? That's really just more digital intelligence.
And also about intelligence, you mentioned about fighting financial crime data, which is really important for
absolutely,
the financial sector,
Yeah, so financial crime is moving a little bit away from maybe traditional fraud, where, you know, I'm a fraudster, I go in, I rob an account, I get money. But with financial crime, one of those areas is mule accounts and mule networks. And so mule accounts generally are people that either knowingly or unknowingly have an account that they allow to be used to move their money around. So if I'm a fraudster, if I've got some money illegally, the first thing I want to do is basically make it untraceable. So I move it around the mule network. Mule networks are also used for terrorist financing and all sorts of money laundering, things like that. What we found is the digital identity network is a really great extra layer to actually join the dots for that mule network. So we have customers that have been using that for a while, but we're continuing to enhance how our customers can use the network to really fight these mule networks.
Okay. Great. Looking forward to see what other developments are going to happen there. Yeah, because we forgot to mention to our readers that you are working on an authentication hub, which is really important, and also some collaborative efforts. You have built like a consortium of other companies that bring on their data. So lots of excitement, exciting things happening.
And the authentication hub is just really relevant with PSD2 at the
Exactly.
moment, so.
Yeah, because everything, the discussions now, the topics are around PSD2.
Exactly.
So we kind of will make like a follow-up story with how the Identity Hub unveils the PSD2 story.
Let's do that.
Okay, great. Thank you for watching us, and thank you, Stephen, for having me here and for having this lovely conversation around the ThreatMetrix Digital Identity Network.